The most dangerous words your family will ever say to you aren't said in anger. They're said with love. That's what makes them so hard to answer. You hear, "We're worried about you, Mom," and you know they mean it. But underneath that love, the pressure builds, quietly, slowly, until one day you look around and realize you're being moved through your own life like furniture. I'm Catherine. I'm 90 years old, and I spent too many years thinking that keeping the peace meant agreeing with the people I love. It nearly cost me everything. What I finally learned wasn't how to fight back. It was one sentence, calm, clear, and impossible to dismiss, that changed how my family talked to me forever. If you've ever felt love and pressure arrive at the same moment, this is for you. Comment 1 if your family has said something like this to you. Comment 0 if you've found a way to hold your ground. There are 3 sentences I have heard more times than I can count. It's not safe for you to be alone. We have the room. Just come stay with us. Let's find somewhere closer so we can keep an eye on you. If you are a woman past 60 living on your own, you have heard at least one of them, and you know the feeling that comes along with it, something warm and something heavy arriving at the same time, impossible to separate. The people saying these things are not wrong to worry. That is what makes this so complicated. Your children love you, your family loves you, and love, when it gets anxious, starts looking for problems to solve. It starts measuring your life against a standard of safety that was never yours to begin with. It starts translating your independence into risk. It starts speaking in a language that sounds like concern, but feels underneath like something being slowly taken away from you. We were taught to receive this gracefully, to say thank you for thinking of me and redirect the conversation, to stay warm, keep the peace, not make things harder than they already are. Most of us were also taught, without anyone ever saying it plainly, that a woman who pushes back against her family's concern is being difficult, ungrateful, selfish. So we swallow the discomfort. We say we will think about it. We change the subject and hope they let it go. But they don't let it go. That is the part nobody warns you about. Every time you sidestep the conversation, it grows a little heavier. Every time you say maybe when you mean no, you give away a small piece of the ground you are standing on, and one day, not dramatically, not all at once, you realize the decisions are no longer really yours, not because anyone forced you, but because you never found the words to say otherwise. I have watched this happen to women I know and deeply respect. Women who were sharp and capable and fully in charge of their own lives until the pressure became a current too steady to swim against. Not because their families were unkind, but because love without boundaries doesn't stay gentle forever. It becomes management. It becomes a schedule. It becomes someone else sitting across from you at your own kitchen table, calmly explaining your options as if the choice were already made. Here is what 90 years has taught me. The problem is never whether your family loves you. The problem is what happens when love forgets to ask what you want before it starts deciding. When concern skips the conversation entirely and goes straight to the conclusion. When the people who care about you the most become, without meaning to, the people who make you feel the smallest. The truth is, most of us have spent decades putting everyone else's comfort before our own answers. We've learned to soften our no until it sounds like maybe. We've learned to frame our needs as requests and our rights as favors. And somewhere along the way, we started believing that's just how things work when you get older, that your voice naturally gets quieter, that your choices naturally get smaller. But that is not aging. That is something else entirely, and it doesn't have to be your story. That is exactly what I want to talk about today. Now, let's talk about what most of us try first, and why none of it actually works. When the pressure starts, we don't freeze. We reach for the responses that have always served us, explaining ourselves clearly, staying quiet to keep things calm, or letting the emotion finally come out. These feel like reasonable choices in the moment. They are not. Let me tell you about 3 women I know and what each of them learned from trying. The first is a woman named Dorothy, 78 years old, retired school teacher, has lived alone in the same house for over 30 years. When her son and daughter-in-law sat her down and told her it was time to think about next steps, Dorothy did what thoughtful, capable women do. She prepared. She came back the following week with a document. She walked them through her emergency plan, her medical contacts, her financial situation, her relationships with 3 neighbors who checked on her regularly. She was organized, calm, and completely reasonable. You know what happened? They found more things to be concerned about. Every answer she gave opened 2 new questions. By the 3rd conversation, Dorothy was defending her right to live in her own home as though she were presenting evidence at a hearing. She spent 6 months answering questions that should never have been asked of her. Not because she was wrong, but because she had accepted the premise that she owed them an explanation. And once you accept that framing, the ground never stops moving. Explanation is not a boundary. It is an invitation to keep negotiating. Now let's talk about a woman named Virginia, 71 years old, the kind of person who has always kept things smooth, redirected without confronting, softened without refusing. When her children began pressing her to move somewhere closer, she said what came most naturally. "Let me think about it." She said it in January. She said it again in March. By June, her daughter had already called 3 assisted living facilities and was bringing brochures to Sunday dinners. Virginia had never said yes. She had also never said no. In the space between those 2 things, the decision had quietly moved forward without her, shaped by her non-answers into something that felt inevitable. She hadn't been overruled. She had been outpaced, one gentle deflection at a time. By the time she finally said she wasn't ready, there was already a name on a waiting list. Silence isn't neutral. When everyone around you is already moving, your stillness gets read as permission. Now let's talk about the 3rd response, and this is the one I understand most, because I lived it myself. There comes a point when the pressure has built for long enough that something gives. The voice rises. The months of held frustration finally surface. You say things you have been swallowing for longer than you realized, and for about 30 seconds it feels like relief. Then you watch their faces. The worry shifts into something quieter and more certain. You have just handed them the one thing they needed to justify every plan they were already making. Your pain became their evidence. Anger without clarity doesn't protect you. It confirms the story they were already telling. I am not telling you this to leave you without hope. I am telling you because all 3 of these responses come from the same belief, that if you explain enough, endure enough, or finally break open enough, they will understand and stand down. But understanding has never been what changes this dynamic. What changes it is something quieter, something that costs far less effort and holds far more ground than anything I have described so far. Comment 1, if you have ever tried to explain your way through this. Comment 0 if you have ever just gone quiet and hoped it would pass. I want to tell you about a specific evening, not a general conversation, one specific evening, because that is the kind of memory that stays. It was a Thursday in November. My daughter Ellen and her husband came over for dinner. I had made soup, nothing elaborate, just something warm. We ate and talked about ordinary things. Then Ellen cleared the plates in that particular way she has, where the efficiency tells you something is coming. She sat back down. Her husband folded his hands on the table, and Ellen pulled out a piece of paper. 3 options, printed and organized. A condo 20 minutes from their house, a senior community with a dining hall and group activities, and a third she described as more flexible, which I understood immediately to mean moving into their home. She walked me through each one patiently, the way you present information to someone you are trying to protect from having to think too hard. Her voice was kind, her face was worried, and I sat there in my own kitchen at the table I have sat at for 41 years and felt something I had not expected. I felt like a problem being solved, not a person being asked, not a mother being consulted, a situation, logistical, medical, quietly urgent, being organized before it became harder to manage. I want to be fair to Ellen. Everything she said came from love. I have never doubted it, but love and respect are not the same thing. And you can have all of someone's love while having none of their confidence in your ability to decide for yourself. The truth is, that evening had been coming for nearly a year. There had been phone calls that started casually and drifted toward suggestions, articles left on the counter, a question from my 8-year-old granddaughter at Easter. "Grandma, are you going to live with us someday?" Which told me this conversation had been happening in rooms I wasn't in. Each time, I had responded the same way, warmly, carefully, without ever saying what I actually needed to say. I had been managing their worry instead of standing in my own answer, and the worry had grown precisely because I kept meeting it without ever resolving it. I did not cry that evening. I did not raise my voice. I sat still and let Ellen finish. I looked at the paper. I looked at her. And then I said one thing, not a speech, not a rebuttal, one sentence, maybe 20 seconds of words. Then I waited. Ellen stopped. Her husband looked at her. There was a pause, the kind that means the room has shifted. And then Ellen asked me a question. Not, "Which option do you prefer?" A real question, about what I actually wanted, about what home meant to me. It was the first time in months I had felt heard rather than handled. What I had to unlearn to get to that moment took longer than I would like to admit. I had spent years believing the right answer to pressure was a better argument, more clarity, more patience, more evidence. None of it worked because it was solving the wrong problem. My family did not lack information. They lacked a clear signal about where my position ended and the conversation began. Defense says, "Here is why your worry is misplaced." Clarity says, "Here is where I stand, and it is not open for discussion." One invites argument, the other ends it. I had spent too many years in the first position without knowing it. Not because I was weak, because I had believed that loving my family well enough meant I would never need to protect myself from them. That is a beautiful belief. It is also, I have learned, an incomplete one. I want to give you 3 sentences, not theories, not principles. 3 specific things you can say the next time the pressure arrives, the next time the paper gets pulled out at your kitchen table. That will change how the conversation moves. The first is for the moment when someone tells you it is not safe to be living alone. Here is what most of us say: "I'm fine, I have a plan, let me explain." And the conversation becomes a negotiation. Here is what you can say instead: "I hear that you're worried, and I need you to trust that I've thought about this more than anyone." That is it. You are not dismissing their concern. You are acknowledging it fully. But you are also establishing something essential: that you have considered your own situation as a capable adult, and that the appropriate response to your answer is trust, not investigation. Notice also what this sentence does not do. It does not invite them to evaluate your plan against their standard of safety. It does not open a door to counter-arguments. It closes the frame. You have acknowledged their love, stated your own competence, and named what comes next. That sequence, in that order, is nearly impossible to argue with without sounding unreasonable. Most people, when they feel heard and gently redirected, will pause. That pause belongs to you. Worry is not the same as authority. Acknowledging one does not grant the other. The second sentence is for when they keep returning, when you have already said you are not ready, and 2 weeks later the conversation arrives again wearing a slightly different coat. For this moment, I've told you where I stand. I won't be discussing it again today. Say it once without heat, and then redirect. Talk about dinner. Ask about the grandchildren. Change the subject as if what you just said was a natural part of the conversation, because it is. The key is the second part: not ever, not this is final. Today. It gives them a small amount of ground, the implicit suggestion that you are still someone who can be spoken to, while closing off this particular conversation completely. Pressure requires resistance to expand. When you remove the resistance cleanly and without drama, there is nothing to push against. A repeated question does not become more valid the more times it is asked. The third sentence is for the hardest moment, when it is not one person but several, when the family has arrived at a quiet consensus, and you are sitting at the center of it, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. For this, I know you all love me, and I am not asking for permission. 7 words at the end, after the acknowledgement. Not, "I don't need your permission." That sounds defensive. Not, "I've already decided." That sounds closed. "I am not asking for permission" is different. It is simple and clear, and it does not attack. It names the dynamic correctly. They have been speaking as if a decision is still pending. You are clarifying that it is not. The decision belongs to you, and it was already made long before this conversation started. Naming a dynamic correctly is more powerful than arguing against it. I want you to notice one thing about all 3 of these sentences. None of them require you to be unkind. None of them require you to raise your voice or prove your competence or list your grievances. They work precisely because they do not do those things. They are quiet, brief, and they hold their ground without apology, because they are spoken from certainty rather than defense. You are not convincing anyone of anything. You are simply making clear what has always been true. This is your life, and you are still living it on your own terms. At 90 years old, I can tell you, that is not a small thing. That is everything. This morning I had my coffee by the window. The light was low, the way it gets in early spring. Nobody knocked on the door. Nobody called to check if I had taken my medication. Nobody pulled out a list. It was just the coffee and the light and the quiet that belongs to a person who is still, at 90 years old, fully in charge of her own morning. I tell you this not to make it sound simple. It took me years to earn that quiet. not because my family finally stopped loving me, but because I finally learned to say clearly where my life began. That is what they needed. Not walls, not arguments, not evidence, just clarity. A boundary isn't a rejection, it is a definition. It tells the people who love you where they end and you begin. And when it is stated calmly, without anger, without apology, it is one of the most loving things you can offer, because it stops the guessing, ends the negotiation, and gives everyone, including you, permission to exhale. Your family is not the enemy. The pressure they create is not malicious. But pressure without a container expands until it fills everything, and you, at the center of it, become smaller and smaller without anyone intending it. What I want for you is not distance from the people you love. It is the kind of closeness that can only exist when they know where the lines are. That is not coldness. That is respect working the way it is supposed to. I have thought about the women who will hear this today. The ones sitting alone on a Wednesday afternoon, replaying a conversation they don't know how to answer. The ones who love their children fiercely and still feel sometimes like strangers inside decisions that are entirely about their own lives. You are not alone in this. You are not being difficult. You are not asking for too much by insisting on being the one who decides. You have spent your whole life caring for others. What you have earned in return is not gratitude or accommodation. It is something simpler and harder to give, to be trusted with your own story. I am 90 years old. I have watched people I love disappear gradually, not through illness, not through tragedy, but through the slow accumulation of other people's decisions made with the best of intentions. I do not want that for you, and I do not believe you want it for yourself. The words I gave you today are not magic. They will not fix everything, but they will do one thing: put the conversation back in the right hands, and those hands are yours. Love doesn't ask you to disappear, and you don't have to. If this felt like something you needed to hear today, please give this video a like and subscribe. I'll be here, still learning, still choosing, still having my coffee by the window. And tell me, comment 1 if you already have your words. Comment 0 if you're still looking, because that is exactly why I keep showing up.